Hello and welcome. We are well into our card match app. So as you can see in this video, we're going to be working on the actual collection view. And by the end of this lesson, you're going to be displaying the images in the cells, and you're going to be able to tap on the cells to flip the card as well. It might seem simple, but there's actually quite a lot to it. So let's get started. So in order to flip the cards and to see the image on the other side, we have to actually finish configuring our cell, because here we are just displaying the backs of the cards, but we haven't actually changed the image on the front of the card. So let me remind you, in our custom collection view cell, we actually have two image views. The back image view is always just going to be the back of the card, but the front image view, we want to show the appropriate picture, right, for the card that is in that position. So if we take a look at our view controller back here, this is where we're going to set that. Now, there is one slight problem so far, and that is that this method, 𝗩𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗄, this one returns a cell to us to use, but it doesn't know what data type that cell is. When we specify this reuse identifier card cell, it's going to look for this prototype that we have here. And card cell, if you look at, there's the identifier. If you look at the custom class that we set it to, it's CodeWithChris cell. Right? That's our custom subclass that we created here. That's the type of cell that it is. Unfortunately, this method, 𝗩𝗶𝗱𝗄𝗃 doesn't know that. It just assumes that it is a basic UICollectionView cell. So what we have to do is actually take that object, that cell that it returns to us, and then we have to cast it as the appropriate data type that it really is. And casting is just a technical term for, think of it as a way to tell the system to treat this object as a different type. Right, so since we know that the cell that is returned to us with the identifier card cell is actually the data type CodeWithChris cell, and if you take a look at this method and you go to quick view, the type that it thinks that it's returning to us is a basic UICollectionView cell. We actually have to cast that object and tell the system that, hey, no, it's not a UICollectionView cell, it's actually a CodeWithChris cell, our custom subclass. So the way we can do the casting, telling the system to treat this returned cell as a CodeWithChris cell, is to use the as keyword. So it's essentially treat this cell as a type of CodeWithChris cell. There are two different types of casting that we can do. One of it is, I am sure that this object is this type, and the other way is, I'm not so sure that this is that type. So let me show you the confident way first. When you are confident that that object is supposed to be the type that you're trying to cast it as, you use an exclamation mark like this. And the system is going to treat that object that's returned as a CodeWithChris cell type. So you're going to be able to call the appropriate methods and properties of that of this class. Now, the downfall of doing this is if it turns out this object isn't actually a type of that class and you're telling the system to treat it as that class, it's going to crash when you try to access methods and properties that don't exist, because the object isn't really that type and you're trying to tell the system to treat it as that type. But I can tell you that we are confident that the cell returned with the identifier card cell is going to be of that type. And that's because we manually set it right here, right? This prototype cell with this identifier card cell, we set the type to CodeWithChris cell. All right, so now let me show you the not so sure way. If you're not really sure, you can use the question mark. What that's going to do is it's going to try to cast the object as a CodeWithChris cell. If it happens to be actually that type of object, then all's going to be good. But if it turns out that the object isn't actually a CodeWithChris cell, then, and you're trying to cast it as that, it's going to return you nil instead. And so as with the question mark can also be treated as a test. You're testing that object to see if it's actually this data type. But since we're sure, we're going to use the exclamation mark. We're going to tell the system that, the cell you're going to return to us is actually of this type. And by doing this, it's going to allow us to call all of the methods and access all of the properties of the card collection view cell, right? The front image and the back image. The front image is the one we want to set, right? So we can go ahead and call this and then assign it. We'll access the image property and then assign it the front image. Now, we can do better than to actually do that configuration right here. Instead of setting the front image view inside the view controller, we're going to leave that responsibility up to the cell. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a method in our subclass here. We're going to create a method for all of the configuration, and then inside of the view controller, we're simply going to call that method right here. We're going to pass in the appropriate card for it to set. So let's go to our card collection view cell, and we're going to create a method called setCard, or maybe how about configure cell. All right, and the information we need to configure the cell is basically the card that this cell represents. Right, so I'm going to add a parameter to this function and say that it expects you to pass in the card. And here I'm going to set the front image view to the image that represents the card. All right, so we're going to do front image view dot image is equal to UI image named, and then we're going to grab this string. So if you look into our card class right here, it has a property called image name, right? So that's going to be the graphic asset inside our asset library. It's going to be card 1 to card 13. It's going to be set to the one that represents this card. So we basically have to just use the image name property. So here I'm going to pass in card.imageName. Now this line of code is exactly what we did in the war card game when we're setting the playing card images, right? This is the UI image view. It's got an image property which we need to set to a UI image object, which is what we're creating right here. And we are initializing that UI image object with the graphic asset that we want. So this is effectively going to set that front image view to that card image. Now we also want to keep track of the card that was passed in here because we're going to need access to these properties is matched and is flipped. So we definitely want to keep track of this card. We can keep track of it by creating a property up here. Let's call that, let's just call it card. I'm going to set it to an optional, actually right here. So at first it's going to be empty, it's going to be nil. But once you call configure cell and you pass in the card, then we're going to keep track of the card this cell represents. So we're going to do self.card is equal to card. So self.card refers to this property, and this card is the card that was passed in. All right, so we're making some pretty good progress here. Let's save this file, go to view controller, and now I'm going to get rid of this to do, and I can just call the method that we just wrote. So use dot notation. We're going to call configure cell, and we're going to pass in the card. Now, here's a stumbling block. Which card are we passing in here? Well, that really depends on which cell the collection view is trying to display, right? And that's going to be dictated by the index path. So if it's trying to display cell 0, then we probably want to show card 0 from our array. If it's going to show cell number 1, then we want to grab card number 1 from our card array. So here we want to get the card from the card array. And remember, we have a whole bunch of cards in here, and we are going to pass in as an index, the index path.row. Remember I told you the row property of the index path represents which cell it's trying to display. All right, so this is the card that we want to pass into configure cell. So you can very simply you can either just put that in here, or you can create a separate variable first, whatever helps you understand things better. So we can just call this card, and I can just pass in the card right there. All right. I'm doing it in 2 steps so that you can see, you can understand that. And then that's it. That's it for this. Now we're still not going to see anything if we run the code right now, because even though we are setting the front image view, the back image view is always on top. What we need to do now is actually flip the card. So we are going to create a method in this cell called flip up, and we might as well also declare flip back, or flip down, let's say. So flipping up would be changing the image view from the back image view to the front image view. And we have a handy method actually of the UIView class to make that sort of flipping animation very easily. So let me show you what that is. So type in UIView. This is actually a method of the class, and it's called transition right here. So there are 2 different ones. This is the one we want right here, I believe. Creates a transition animation between the specified views using the given parameters. So the one that you choose should have a from parameter, a to parameter, a duration, some options on how you want to do that animation, and then finally a completion handler. But this is basically a chunk of code that you can run when the animation is complete. So this is pretty self-explanatory. We want to transition from the back image view to the front image view when we're flipping the card up, right? So in here, in the from parameter, I'm going to put the back image view. In the to parameter, I'm going to put the front image view. And the duration is going to be, I'm going to put 0.3. It's specified in seconds. So we want this to be relatively quick. Now the animation options, there are several ones that you can do. If you hit dot, you're going to see a bunch of them. Transition, curl up, flip from left, from right, top. I'm going to do flip from left. But actually, I want to use both this one, show high transition views, and also flip from left, because the transition flip from left is actually going to be the one that does the flipping, but this one is actually going to hide the back image view, because we're not changing really the order here. And so I wanted to hide the view that it transitioned from. So it's going to hide the back image view if you choose this one. So in order to do a combination of both of these, you can actually, instead of just choosing one, you can specify an array of all of the ones you want to use. So first of all, I'm going to choose show high transition views, and then I'm going to put this inside angle brackets like that. And then I'm going to put comma here to indicate another element in this array. I'm going to press dot again, and then now I can choose the second one, transition flip from left. And just like that, we're able to specify 2 different transitions for the options parameter. For completion, I'm just going to put nil, because we don't have any code that we want to run when it completes. So this is flip up animation. Now before we can try it out, actually, we have to handle the tap events. So when the user taps on the collection view cell, the UICollectionView is going to notify its delegate, and it's going to tell it that it flipped up. If you remember back here in the view controller, it turns out that we specified it conforms to the delegate protocol of the collection view. And also we set the view controller as that delegate. So when this collection view detects those taps, it's going to tell its delegate, which is the view controller. All we have to do is actually handle that method down here. So that method is did select item at, this one right here. So again, it's the same method name on all of these, but how you can tell them apart is this parameter did select item at a specific index path. See, this index path tells us the exact cell that the user selected. So we're going to be able to first get a reference to the cell that was tapped. We're going to do that by calling CodeWithChris dot cell for item at, this one here, and that's going to return a cell for us. And we're going to pass in the index path that came in through here. This indicates which one the user selected. And remember, this one, cell for item, this method returns a UICollectionView cell. Actually, it's an optional type, so it could return nil as well. So we're going to try to cast this as a CodeWithChris cell. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to call our flip up method. So let me demonstrate. We're going to say let cell equals that returned cell. And then if I write cell dot and try to look for flip up, you'll see that it doesn't exist. The reason is because this just returns to us a generic UICollectionView cell. It thinks it's a basic cell, but it's not. We know it's a type of CodeWithChris cell. And this time, I'm actually going to use the question mark as. The reason is because if it can't even find a cell at that index path, it doesn't matter what we cast it as. Right? So I want to let there to be the possibility that this cell could be nil. But you learned about optional chaining in the lesson where we introduced optionals. So we can safely call the flip up method by using optional chaining with that question mark there. If it turns out that this cell is nil because this index path for some reason doesn't exist and nil gets assigned there, this line of code isn't going to crash the app because of this optional chaining right here. We're only going to call flip up if that cell is actually a CodeWithChris cell object. All right, so now we get to try it out. Let's test this out. Let's run our app. And now we should be able to tap on the cells. We're calling up that flip up animation and having the card flip up, and you can see what's underneath. Ah, that's awesome. Did you see that? It's so cool. Now, we did shuffle them. So, I mean, these two didn't really seem shuffled, but maybe we have a lot of those pairs. And did you notice that? I scrolled down and these were all flipped up already. So let me run that again so you can see. If I scroll up and down, all of them are flipped down, right? They're all flipped down by default. Flip this guy up. If I scroll this out of view, remember the collection view is smart enough that it reuses cells that are out of view, right? So if I scroll this guy out of view, that cell that's flipped up right now, it's going to be reused for some cell that is down there that is about to come into view. You see? So the reason why this is a different image though is because we've configured the cell, so it's set that front image to the image that represents that card at that position, right? So this is the correct card at that position, but the reason why it's showing the front image view instead of the back is because it reused the cell that we had flipped up from there. We changed the state of that cell and then it reused it down here. So what that tells me is that we have to reset the state of the cell so that it's flipped down again, so that in the case that cells get reused, and they will get reused, we're not going to have this sort of situation here. So if I scroll up again, one of the cards that as soon as this card goes out of view, one of the cards that is coming into view is going to be in a flipped up state. You can see now it's this one. So it took that cell down there and it reused it to display this guy. I really love that about the collection view, that it's so memory efficient. You can see each time it goes out of view and into view, that cell is being reused somewhere else. So we got to reset the state of the cell. So the way we can do that is, why don't we actually do that inside the configure cell method. So when you're configuring that cell for use, let's make sure we reset the state of the cell. And the way we can do that is we're basically going to reset the state of the cell by checking the flip status of the card, and then showing the front or the back image view accordingly. Right, so depending on if that card is currently flipped up or flipped down, we should show the front or the back image view accordingly. So the way we can check that is just by writing card.isFlipped, right? We're going to check this. So if the flipped status is true, we're going to use an if statement here. If it's true, then we're going to show the front image view. Else, we're going to show the back image view. So the way we can make sure that we show the front image view is simply by calling this transition animation. Now, I could just call flip up, but I actually want to pass in because I don't want there to be an animation, right? When it configures the cell, I just want it to be in a flipped up state or in a flipped down state. Now I could copy this code and I can put it here, and then I can change the duration to 0, and that's going to ensure that the card is in a flipped up state because we're transitioning from back to front with 0 duration. But in an effort to not duplicate code too much, I'm going to erase that and instead introduce a new parameter called speed here. And we're going to make this a time interval type, which is just essentially a double, which is like a decimal number. So instead of specifying 0.3 here and making that hard-coded, I'm just going to put speed right there. So now I can call flip up and pass in 0, right, as a speed. But as a result, I'm also going to have to add that parameter here, right? Because this is no longer a valid method call. See? So I could specify 0.3 here for this animation. But you know, one thing I want to try is I don't want the view controller to have to dictate the speed. And so what I can do is try to give this parameter a default value. And you can do that by just writing equals 0.3 here. So this is basically saying if it's essentially making this parameter optional. If it's specified, then it's going to use whatever is specified, such as 0 up here when you pass that in. But if you don't specify the speed parameter, then it's just going to default and use that value. So now I can just call flip up and not call that parameter, and it should still be fine. So let's build the project just to make sure. Build succeeded, awesome. All right, so in here, we're gonna do the same thing here actually. For flip down, speed time interval equals 0.3. Show the front image view is flipped. So we're gonna do the flip down now. So it's basically the same thing. We're gonna copy this and we're gonna paste it down here. Flip down, and we are gonna instead do front image view and transitioning to the back image view. Now you might even say to me, why can't we combine both of these into a single method and provide a parameter to specify whether we should be transitioning from back to front or front to back? Yeah, you could. It really depends how far you want to take that sort of optimization. I think there is a line between optimization for not duplicating code versus understandability and clarity. So that's going to be kind of up to your decision. I'm going to call flip down now. And I'm going to call flip down with speed 0. All right. There's one more thing we have to set actually right here. Remember, our card class has a flipped property, right? And we're trying to determine, we're trying to use that property here to determine whether we should show that, configure that cell with the card flipped up or flipped down. So we have to make sure that we change this status when we flip the card up here. So let's do that. Set the status of the card. So this would be card dot is flipped equals true, right? And this would be set the status of the card is flipped equals false. And that should be good. Let's run our app. Now we should be able to flip up the card, but we can't flip it down just yet because we haven't called flip down in any particular scenario. So if you tap it, it's just going to keep flipping up. But, however, check this out. If I scroll all the way down, the cell is still getting reused. Don't get me wrong. It's probably one of these cells, but the difference is now in our configure cell, when it's setting that front image, we're also setting the state, whether it should be flipped up or flipped down. So that's why it's seamless now. So don't get me wrong, the cell is still being reused down here for one of these guys, but the state of the cell is now appropriately set. Okay, now let's handle the flip down scenario. And the way we do that is just by going back to the view controller in the did select item and just detecting whether that card should be flipped up or flipped down, or rather whether we should call flip up or flip down. So again, check the status of the card to determine how to flip it. So here we can do cell.card.isFlipped. Okay, can we do that? Cell.card. Right, checking the status is flipped. So if this is equal to false, and this is an if statement, so we're checking if is flipped is false, then we want to flip it up. So else we're going to flip it down. I'm going to call this one right here. Flip the card up, flip the card down. All right, now let's try this out. This is so cool. Flip up, flip down, flip down. This is so cool. Now, this is huge. This is huge, guys. All right, so now we have our cards flipping. In this lesson, you learned about how to do some animations. You also learned about closures, which are like blocks of code, just like a function, except that it doesn't have a name associated with it. In the next lesson, we're going to add some logic to our app so that when the user flips open two cards, we can determine if they're a match or not. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.